should be getting audio as well right now. Alysa's. Oh, maybe it'll take you a second. It should be there in a moment. Big delay if that's the way it is. Okay. Okay, we're live on Exploring Facebook Live.
Great. Hi everybody. My name is Alysa McCall, and I'm with Polar Bears International. And for those of you that have seen our broadcast before, this one might look a little bit different. So usually when we broadcast with Explore.org, we are live from Churchill, Manitoba up in Canada, and it's very cold, and there's polar bears outside. But right now things are a little bit different. We are actually in San Diego, California, and there's no polar bears outside, which is probably a good thing. And it's quite a bit warmer, and you may even be able to see the surfboards in the corner over here. It's quite something. And the reason that we are in San Diego right now is because it's Earth Day. And Earth Day is very special. And I will get Marisa to tell you a little bit more about it. And for those of you that have been watching our programs, I don't think you've met Marisa before. Marisa is with Polar Bears International, and she's a very great colleague of ours that we love, and it's great to have her on camera. So Marisa, can you tell everyone a little bit about your job, and then let's talk about Earth Day.
Yeah, great. Hi everyone, I'm Marisa Kraus, and I am the program manager for Polar Bears International. And one of the programs that I manage is Project Polar Bear, and that is our youth-based carbon reduction contest. And it's a challenge where we challenge young leaders with the help of an adult mentor to tackle community-level solutions in their schools, with their zoos and aquariums nearby. And so they really look at, solutions to reducing CO2 in their communities. And so, like Alysa said before, it's a special day. It's Earth Day. We came out to San Diego to recognize all 10 of those teams. And then additionally, 3 leading teams that were recipients of a cash grant to further their projects. And so we had some really great projects this year. The Hamilton Water Savers, with the help of the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore, were our grand prize winners. And they did a water conservation project where they also addressed eliminating the use of single-use water bottles. So we're really proud of them. They did a lot of great work. And then additionally, we had a second winner, the Dana Sard School in Spain, and they really tackled all levels. They worked on energy efficiency in their school. They looked at food systems by addressing food locally and vermicomposting. And they were really great. And we had a third winner, the Sea Knights, and they were also a recipient of a cash grant. And they did something what we thought was really innovative. They paired members of their high school with members of the Andover elderly community to foster a gardening culture. And so we were really, really happy with just the innovation and the teamwork that all of our teams did this year. So it was really great.
Great, thank you. So those are some indirect ways that we can help polar bears. Anything that reduces our carbon dioxide is a good thing for polar bears and for people. But of course, PBI, we also do some more direct conservation efforts for polar bears. And so maybe if I can pull in BJ, he's just behind the camera, but I might pull him in just for a minute. BJ just got back from Norway, where he was doing some den camera work to watch polar bear moms emerging from the dens with their cubs and getting some information on that. So we might just pull in BJ for a minute, have him talk about that, and then we're going to dive in and take some of these questions. Okay. Switcheroo in the living room.
Yeah. Usually I'm behind the camera.
Yeah.
It's strange to be in front of it.
No, you're great.
Okay, perfect.
You're great at it. Yeah. So can you just tell everyone a bit about what Norway was like and what you guys are doing up there? It's a pretty amazing technological feat what you guys did.
Yeah, so much like the Explore community where there's cameras all over the world, we did something similar where we put cameras on polar bear dens in Norway. And this is a special part of Norway. It's the island chain of Svalbard, and it's this crazy bunch of islands. It's like 3 hours north out of Oslo by flight. They're kind of suspended between it's Greenland and Russia and sort of Norway, so it's way out there in the Barents Sea, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And there's this polar bear population out there that dens every spring in the mountains there. So a lot of the denning that, if you've been on the Polar Bears International site or some of the things we've shared with Explore, it's denning in very flat areas, Hudson Bay, where you spent a lot of time. The denning takes place in these really, really sort of flat and barren areas where the snow drifts. Well, in Norway, they den on the sides of mountains. So it's pretty spectacular. Wherever the snow collects, a female will find a spot, dig in, and have her young. And that's we went out and put cameras on these areas to learn a little bit more about what happens during the denning season. So we want to look at behavior. We want to look at how long they stay at the dens, when they come out, how many cubs they have when they come out. That's important to know, as well as a few of the polar bears actually are wearing collars. The females have collars on them, and there's accelerometers inside those collars that are collecting information. And we want to make sure that we know exactly what's happening when those accelerometers are picking up, when they're logging. So, is the female rolling? Is she walking? Is she nursing, whatever. So these cameras will help answer some of those questions.
That's great. Well, thank you, and stay tuned for maybe updates down the road when we find out what the camera has collected.
Totally.
And what we're going to do with that information.
Yeah, so the cameras are really remote in this place, and the Norwegian Polar Institute, the folks that we work with there in Norway, they just took their research icebreaker and research helicopter out to go pick up the dens. Now they're doing other work as well out there. They're going to be doing some mark recapture work of the polar bears and things. We should be getting some hard drives back pretty soon with female polar bear footage on it, which should be pretty neat. So stay tuned. We'll definitely be sharing that stuff out on the Explore community when that stuff comes back.
Oh, and maybe one day we'll be able to get internet streaming and do a live chat from a polar bear den.
Yeah, that would be the goal, huh?
Yeah,
that would be kind of neat.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, BJ.
Yeah, totally.
Get back behind the camera, make sure we're still streaming.
Yeah.
Cool. And we will run through some questions. We don't have super long with you guys today, but this is really neat to be doing a Facebook live chat. So we'll dive right in. Okay, so the first question that we got was this year a good year climate-wise for polar bears? So we're not really going to know that until probably the summer. We are able to watch what the sea ice is doing via satellites. And so can you, if you go to the National Snow and Ice Data Center, they have daily pictures of the Arctic sea ice, and they also have write-ups monthly about kind of where this year fits into other years. So this year is actually the lowest maximum on record. And so that means that there's less ice than there has been kind of at the height of winter. So the Beaufort Sea is more affected right now than the Hudson Bay. Hudson Bay is doing pretty good ice-wise, though freeze-up was a bit different this year. And we're going to have to wait and see till the kind of official breakup season, see what the polar bears are doing and how they're looking. So stay tuned for updates on that, because we will definitely be interested in that and writing about it.
And if I might add, also one of the things that we do in the summer months that we're looking forward to is Arctic Sea Ice Day in July. And so that's a time that we kind of draw attention to sea ice losses, and then also push community level solutions specifically regarding to food systems and looking at the transportation that's involved with transporting food and goods from one place to the next. So that's a good opportunity to look for updates as well.
Absolutely. It's a fun day. The next question we have is, why are polar bears so often used as a symbol of the effects of climate change? This is a really interesting question, and I'm pretty sure there's probably a few different answers out there. I'll give you my answer, and then maybe Marisa can follow up. Polar bears are such an interesting species with climate change. So they are a keystone species. They're what we can call an umbrella species in the Arctic. They're at the very top of the food chain in the Arctic. And so anything that's happening below the food chain, so with the microorganisms or fish or seals, polar bears are going to be impacted by that. And also, if polar bears are being impacted by something, we know that we'll see probably changes in the seal population. So if we happen to be losing polar bears in a certain area, it's possible the seals might be doing better because of the reduced predation. But another reason we talk about polar bears being impacted, or being kind of the poster child for climate change, is because they're so directly impacted by it. They're kind of this canary in the coal mine for climate change. So for a lot of animals, that live maybe in a forest or a desert or kind of, are the more terrestrial ecosystems. When we talk about climate change, it's not maybe so direct and obvious. So maybe the plant species are kind of slightly changing over time, or we have different species moving in or out. Some protections we can do for terrestrial species include building fences, stopping poachers, planting more trees. But with polar bears, of course, they really depend on that sea ice. And sea ice, just like any ice, is really dependent on the temperature. And so when we warm temperatures, ice melts, and that's just simply physics. And the reason that the temperature is warming is because our atmosphere is getting warmer. And the atmosphere around the Earth is like a blanket, and it keeps the Earth warm. And traditionally, this was perfect. It allows life on Earth because we have this warm atmosphere. But what's happening is that the gases that are in this atmosphere trapping heat, humans come along and, we're so smart. We came up with all these amazing ways to move goods and get food and these really, fantastic things to make our lives better. But we started to realize that by doing these things, by burning fossil fuels, we're adding rampant amount of gases into this atmosphere. So we're basically thickening this atmospheric blanket around Earth, and we thicken a blanket and we get warmer.
It's too much of it.
Yeah, there's too many gases in the atmosphere. And so we need to get back to that balance. And so we can use different types of energy, renewable energy, solar, wind, things like that. And it's just simply this really direct connection. And sea ice isn't something we can just regrow when we want to. We can't put a border around it. We can't protect it in the same way that we can protect different habitats. And so that's why we worry so proactively for sea ice. And that's why we're trying to act proactively and save that sea ice to keep polar bears in the Arctic, but also all the other Arctic species and Arctic people that depend on the sea ice for their food. It's all very connected.
And I think on a personal level, why they're so connected with the message of a warming Arctic and climate impacts are, with some of our conservation partners with zoos and aquariums, they really act as an ambassador species. They're an iconic megafauna. People connect with them, in these managed populations. And so, it's important for people to care about wildlife and wild places to be inspired to take action. Absolutely. In order to save them.
One of the animals being impacted in the Arctic is the polar cod, but polar cod just aren't quite as charismatic maybe, so they could be a good poster child, but I don't think people would connect with them on the same level maybe. And that's really a lot of, why humans take
Absolutely.
action when we connect with them. Watching a polar bear moms and cubs, they're so similar to humans, or something about them is really compelling. And even when you try to keep that kind of scientific distance, it's really, they're beautiful animals.
Yeah. And when we can connect people with wildlife, I think it helps us convey the message of why it's important to protect the ecosystems that both polar bears and people depend on.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So here's a really interesting question. Would breeding polar bears in zoos and reintroducing them to the population keep them from extinction? So I'll start with that and then pass it on to you. You have a more technical background on that. So breeding polar bears in zoos can be an important conservation measure, but because of the habitat and the environment that the Arctic is and the type of learning that's involved in survival in the Arctic, we really can't reintroduce a captive polar bear into the wild, one that was born in captivity. It really needs to be raised by its mother and taught a lot of things that a human just simply wouldn't be able to convey to that polar bear, or it'd be really hard for a polar bear to figure out. Moms keep their cubs for 2.5 years or so, and throughout that time the cub is learning every single day from mom about how to travel, where to travel, who to avoid, what to eat, how to hunt, where to move. It's very complicated, so I don't think we'll see captive bred bears going back into the wild, but like I started with, it can be an important conservation measure, like you know.
Yeah, and while it may not be a viable option to reintroduce them back into the wild, it's important to also remember and know that these captive populations are managed very closely by the Species Survival Plan run by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And so all of these accredited institutions across North America are under the advisement of a committee of professionals who can make recommendations for where breeding should take place in order to maintain a healthy population.
And keeping part of that is keeping a genetic variety in the captive population.
Absolutely.
Keeping a lot of different genetics going, so we have that kind of bank of DNA variability in the worst case scenario. So
Absolutely.
very interesting. And a really great question and very important for Earth Day. What can I do personally to reduce the impact of global warming? I'll pass that to you.
I think that's a really great question, and I think as we progress really as a global economy, we're connected now more than ever, more than we ever have been. And so it's really easy for us to get together with our community and really connect with people overseas. And so I think one option is being vocal about, what you want in the future and sort of, voting and demanding a renewable energy future. So voting for policymakers that will support those changes. I think that's important. And then I also think it's important to be connected in your community and know what's going on. You want to make smart choices to support the infrastructure for transportation changes. We want to make mass transportation more available to communities across the world. We want to make, for instance, we're pushing the transportation challenge right now for Earth Day with Polar Bears International. And so we want to push for communities to have more bike safe lanes, the infrastructure that makes it safe for people to bike from one place to the next. Mass transit. We also, while it's important to transition to renewable energy, I think it's also important to use much, much less of the types of energy that are burning fossil fuels when we're in the transition period. And so I think we can also take steps to make sure not only our houses are energy efficient, but scaling it up, looking at your school, at your business, working with your zoos and aquariums. And so I think there's lots of things you can do.
Excellent.
It's helpful.
Yeah, and check out our website for more ideas, and I'm sure there's lots out there on Earth Day too. The next question is, how long do polar bears live in the wild and in captivity? So in the wild, we say, around 15 to 18 years is very average. Males live less long than females, so females live a little bit longer. Males fight a lot, and they're pretty nasty with each other, well, because of the females. But males get a lot more injuries. They don't tend to live quite as long. We do see them in the wild, though, living into their early, mid, sometimes late 20s. So that is possible. And we've seen wild polar bears reproduce at, 25 years old. Females, anyway. Males at that point are usually not on their, best game. But in captivity, they live a little bit longer.
Yeah, and you mentioned some important things. Polar bears in zoos and aquariums, you mentioned male polar bears fight a lot, right? In zoos and aquariums, we have a network of professionals that are taking care of these animals. And so from the front lines of keeper staff, training the animals to participate in their health care on a daily basis, up to veterinary care. So if they do happen to get an injury or lose a tooth or something, we have vet staff that can step in and maintain the health of that bear. And I also think it's important to note that in the wild, polar bears rely on the sea ice as their primary resource, right? And in zoos and aquariums, they don't rely on the sea ice, but they do rely on the professionals that are caring for them. And so they're not competing for food. So they can live, I would say, to late 20s or early 30s is pretty typical. I think the oldest bear in a zoo and aquarium at one point was 42. And as far as I know, that's the record, but
And those
don't
in
quote
Winnipeg,
me.
right?
Yeah, in Winnipeg, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was Debbie.
Yeah. She's a famous bear, at least in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So someone's asking for an update on Ursula, sponsored by Explore.org. So this is great. So Ursula is overdue for a bear tracker update, so we'll get that out to you guys. But she's having a really good year. So I'm just looking at the bear tracker right now. But she traveled, up the coast. She's gone a really good distance with her cub. She's really done. It looks like she's doing great for a bear this year. She's really stayed in the west coast of Hudson Bay. We know there's seal pupping there, and at this time of year, she's probably getting a lot of food, and she's probably looking for a mate because she would have just weaned her cub this spring. So we'll get an update on the tracker soon, maybe a couple if they're available. But so far, so good for Ursula. We're really looking forward to seeing how the rest of her year plays out, and hope she can stay out for a long time. And maybe this fall we'll see her go into a den. So we will be keeping you guys updated on what she's doing. But so far, so good for Ursula. All right. How adaptable are polar bears to their changing environment? So, yeah, again, I'll start and maybe you can fill in. So, polar bears are very, maybe we can say behaviorally adaptable. They're highly intelligent. They can figure out problems. They, on a small scale, can find different prey, do different things, and figure out short-term stuff. But on a larger scale, evolutionarily wise, they're a long-lived species that reproduces very slowly. And so polar bears are very slow to evolve and to adapt physically. And we know that because climate change is happening over the scale of decades, that their evolution, it just can't catch up. So we don't expect that they will adapt to a changing environment at the pace that the current environment is changing. We do know that, a few of them might figure out different prey species, or they might kind of move the area they're in. But, they're not going to become terrestrial bears anytime soon. They will rely on the sea ice. As long as we have polar bears, they will need sea ice. And so, it's not something that we're kind of banking on, is polar bears adapting to the changing environment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's very different, the day-to-day activity of an individual bear as opposed to, the population as a whole. And sometimes our zoo and aquarium partners will tell us too, a lot of visitors will ask, well, how do polar bears adapt to this different type of environment? And I think the important thing to note there as well is that polar bears rely on the sea ice. And so, in a zoo and aquarium, they're not relying on changes of sea ice or a warming Arctic. They're adapting to the day-to-day for individual bears.
Mm-hmm. And bears are so smart. But yeah, if the sea ice keeps shifting so fast, it's too hard to figure out. So we want to keep the sea ice as is, and give them lots of opportunities to just hunt as they're capable of doing, because they're very capable as they currently are.
Yeah, and I think as we come together more and more as a global economy to support these new changes to a renewable energy future and increase efficiency, then we're kind of ensuring that as we all work together that we can preserve that Arctic habitat for them to continue to thrive on the sea ice across the Arctic.
Mm-hmm. And kind of in that vein, we have a question about polar grizzly hybrids. Will they become more abundant? Very interesting question. They may become more abundant, so we are seeing a bit more overlap between the populations. It's important to remember that where they're overlapping and breeding together, the polars and the browns, it is still a very, very small percentage of the population, and it's in a very specific location. And so while we may see a few more hybrids coming out, it's not really, we don't expect that these hybrids will take over. The hybrids are not really well adapted to land or ice, so they're not really robust hybrids. It's not really a great thing for either species if it becomes more common. So, but we're keeping an eye out. Scientists are, pretty aware, so are hunters up there, people that are just on the land, keeping an eye out for these hybrids. It is a pretty interesting phenomenon. So we only have time for a couple more questions. And then we'll wrap it up pretty quick here. Okay, so here's an interesting one. I read a report that problem polar bears from the Churchill Polar Bear Holding Facility are airlifted north of Churchill, but don't the polar bears come back to Churchill by instinct, and will they be a problem again next year? Truthfully, yes. A lot of the polar bears that are airlifted out of Churchill annually do come back. They're, like we said, they're very good learners. They're smart. They know where the good smells are. They know where they might be able to find scraps of food. So there are certain bears that do come back every year. In fact, there's one bear in particular that comes back every single year, and he's a nuisance bear. A lot of them don't. They'll kind of get the hint they're not supposed to go through town. But, that's a problem of polar bear management right now. And there's a lot of great people working on it. There's communities all throughout the Hudson Bay area working on polar bear management plans to reduce human-bear conflict and make sure that, we can keep the bears and the humans separate and each kind of not worried about each other. So it's a really good point. I
think that's something that you see across species as well. With climate impacts, you see a lot of displacement of wildlife, which can definitely lead to an increase of human-bear interactions.
Maybe the final question, and I'll pass this over to you first because you have a great way of explaining it. How do I explain global warming to someone who doesn't believe in climate change? What's a really easy way to do that?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. And so I think, one of the important things to remember is talking about it. It's important to talk about what's important to people. We all have values. We all have things in our daily lives that are important to us, our families, future generations. And so the way that I might explain it would be to talk about specifically the sources of this carbon dioxide, right? And then when you're talking about specifically where those sources come from, it automatically can orient a visitor or just, or your brother or your dad or somebody who you're talking to the appropriate solutions to fixing the problem. And so while we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for things like heating and cooling our homes, transporting goods from one place to the next, we're emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And like Alysa touched on earlier, that carbon dioxide acts like a blanket covering it, and it's trapping heat that would have otherwise escaped. And so as we burn more fossil fuels, we're thickening that blanket. So if we want to reduce the amount of those heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere, we can address things like reducing the amount of fossil fuel use. And so transitioning into a renewable energy future, increasing efficiency allows us to use much, much less of the types of energy that burn fossil fuels. And then voting and being vocal about supporting those policy changes that need to occur to make those changes happen.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
What a great question
Great
for Earth
question.
Day. Yeah, I think it's just important to remember, it is basic physics.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be a scary thing. There's a lot of, wonderful solutions out there that are going to make humans healthier and happier, polar bears healthier and happier, and we already kind of know how to do it. We just need to do it on a bigger scale. And I think it's happening. Even in the last 5 years, I've kind of been involved with polar bears. I've seen a lot more acceptance
Absolutely.
and people wanting to move forward, and it's really wonderful. So between that and, the young students that are working on Project Polar Bear and coming up with solutions, it's all very exciting.
Gives us hope.
Yeah. And even people watching right now, you must be watching because you're interested in polar bears. So we thank you for that, because that's wonderful. We do this for polar bears, but also for people that want to learn more. So this is great. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Facebook live chat.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was great to have you, Marisa. It's nice to have you on camera with us. And it's pretty funny to be in San Diego. Right after this, I got to fly way back to northern Canada, so that's going to be a shocker. But I'll enjoy the sun while I have it for another day. And yeah, we'll just keep on, updating the Explore community. We'll update you on Ursula soon. Reach out to us if you have more questions. You can email us at questions@pbers.org. We check that often. Anything like that, just feel free to reach out. And thank you so much to Explore.org, as always, for being such great hosts.
Alysa, should we wrap up with the Spanish team's song?
Oh, can we do
Oh,
that?
let's
That's
do
an
it.
option? Okay, you guys have to see this song.
This is the Dana Sard School out of Barcelona, Spain, and they had three teams, three groups of children in the Project Polar Bear contest this year, with the the older students mentoring the younger students, and so they inspire us every day.
They're amazing. So yeah, that's great. You get to watch the video. They rock.
You're a bear, make a big noise. Living in the cold, gonna need ice to survive. You got problems to chase, a big disgrace. Moving your balls all up